The small town of Ravenswood had always been a peaceful and quiet place, surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills. But one day, strange things started happening. People started disappearing without a trace, and no one could explain why. The local sheriff, Mark Thompson, was determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. He interviewed anyone who may have seen something suspicious, but no one could provide any concrete information. The more he dug, the more he realized that something dark and sinister was at play in Ravenswood. One night, Mark received a mysterious phone call from a man who claimed to have information about the disappearance. The man instructed him to meet him at an abandoned cabin in the forest, promising to reveal the truth about what was happening in the town. Mark was hesitant, but he felt like he had no other choice. He grabbed his flashlight and set out into the forest. The closer he got to the cabin, the more he felt like he was being watched. Every time he turned around, he thought he saw something move in the shadows. When he finally reached the cabin, he hesitated before pushing the door open. Inside, the cabin was filled with strange symbols and artifacts, like something out of an ancient ritual. Mark's sense of dread grew stronger with each step he took. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him and the room began to spin. Mark felt like he was losing consciousness, but before he blacked out, he had a voice whisper, "You should never have come here, Mark. You've disturbed something ancient and powerful." When Mark woke up, he was in a dark and damp cell, with no idea how he got there. He tried to scream for help, but no sound escaped his lips. That's when he saw them, the creatures that lived in the shadows. They were pale, with eyes that glowed with an otherworldly light. Mark realized that the disappearances in Ravenswood were not the work of a serial killer, but of something far more sinister. He was now a prisoner of the beings that haunted the forest, and he would never escape. Days turned into weeks, and Mark's hope began to fade. He was fed meager rations and tormented by the creatures that roamed the halls of the underground facility where he was being held. He knew that he was never going to make it out alive. Just when he thought all was lost, he heard a faint voice calling out to him. It was the voice of the man who had lured him to the cabin, and he was offering Mark one last chance to escape. Mark agreed, and the man led him through a series of tunnels and passageways, eventually bringing him to a secret entrance that led to the surface. The man explained that he was part of a secret society dedicated to keeping the creatures at bay, and that he was one of the few people who knew the truth about what was happening in Ravenswood. Mark emerged from the forest, shaken and changed by the horrors he had experienced. He never spoke of what he had seen, but he always carried the knowledge that something dark and ancient was lurking in the shadows, waiting to claim its next victim. And so, the mystery of the disappearance in Ravenswood remains unsolved to this day, a chilling tale of horror that continues to haunt the residents of the small town. The forests are still dense and the hills are still rolling, but now, the people of Ravenswood know to stay away from the dark and mysterious woods, lest they suffer the same fate as those who came before them. Years passed, and the memory of the disappearance in Ravenswood had faded into the distant past. The town had moved on, and the people had forgotten about the horrors that once plagued their community. However, strange things started happening again. People were disappearing without a trace, just like before. Mark Thompson, who was now an old man, was approached by a young reporter who was determined to uncover the truth about what was happening in Ravenswood. Mark was hesitant to revisit his past, but he knew that the reporter was right. The creatures that haunted the forest were back, and the town was in danger once again. He agreed to help the reporter, and together, they set out into the forest. As they walked deeper into the woods, they encountered strange and eerie phenomena, like shadows that seemed to follow them, and whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. They finally reached the abandoned cabin, and when they entered, they found themselves transported back to the underground facility where Mark had been held captive all those years ago. The creatures were still there, and they were just as frightening as ever. Mark and the reporter had to use all their wits and strength to escape, fighting their way through the tunnels and passageways that led back to the surface. When they finally emerged from the forest, they were shaken and scarred by their experience. But they had the evidence they needed to finally expose the truth about what was happening in Ravenswood. The reporter wrote a series of articles about the disappearance, and the story spread like wildfire. People were shocked and horrified by what they had uncovered. A special task force was created to investigate the mysterious happenings in Ravenswood, and to finally bring the creatures to justice. Mark and the reporter became legends in their own right, and their names were forever linked to the horrors of Ravenswood. But even though they had exposed the truth, they knew that the creatures that haunted the forest would always be there, waiting for their next victim. And so, the mystery of the disappearance in Ravenswood remains unsolved to this day, a chilling tale of horror that continues to haunt the residents of the small town. The forests are still dense and the hills are still rolling, and the people of Ravenswood know that there is something dark and sinister lurking in the shadows, waiting to claim its next victim. The task force arrived in Ravenswood with a sense of purpose and determination. They had heard the stories and seen the evidence, and they were determined to finally put an end to the horrors that plagued the town. They started their investigation by speaking to the residents and gathering any information they could find about the disappearance. They scoured the forest, looking for any clues that might lead them to the source of the evil that haunted the town. One day, they stumbled upon a secret entrance to the underground facility that Mark and the reporter had discovered all those years ago. The entrance was hidden behind a waterfall, and it was clear that someone had been trying to cover up the existence of the facility. The task force entered the facility, armed with the latest technology and weaponry. They encountered the creatures almost immediately, and they fought bravely against the creatures, determined to uncover the truth about what was happening in Ravenswood. As they explored the tunnels and passageways, they discovered a hidden laboratory where the creatures had been created. The lab was filled with strange machines and instruments, and it was clear that someone had been conducting experiments on human subjects. The task force was horrified by what they found. They realized that the disappearances in Ravenswood were the result of a sinister plot to create a new breed of super soldiers, using the residents of the town as guinea pigs. They destroyed the lab and put an end to the evil that had been lurking in the shadows of Ravenswood. The town was finally at peace, and the residents could finally sleep soundly at night, knowing that the horrors that had plagued their community were gone forever. But the memory of what happened in Ravenswood lingered, a haunting reminder of the evil that had once threatened to destroy the town. The task force returned home, hailed as heroes, but they knew that they would never forget the horrors they had encountered in the forest. Years passed, and the story of Ravenswood became a distant memory. The town was once again a peaceful place, where people lived their lives without fear. But there were some who still remembered the horrors of what had once happened there, and they whispered the story to their children, warning them to never venture into the forest, for fear of what might still be lurking there. And so, The mystery of the disappearance in Ravenswood remains a chilling tale of horror, a reminder of the evil that still lurks in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. The forests are still dense and the hills are still rolling, and the people of Ravenswood know that there is something dark and sinister lurking in the shadows, waiting to claim its next victim. For those who dare to venture into the forest, they do so at their own peril. For they know that the horrors of Ravenswood are still there, waiting for their next victim. And they know that the mystery of the disappearance will never be fully solved, a haunting reminder of the evil that still haunts the town. Many years had passed since the task force had put an end to the horrors in Ravenswood. The town had moved on, and the people had finally forgotten about the sinister events that had once plagued their community. But for some, the memory of what had happened still lingered, a haunting reminder of the evil that had once threatened to destroy the town. One day, a young woman named Sarah arrived in Ravenswood, determined to uncover the truth about what had happened there. She had heard the stories, and she was fascinated by the mystery of the disappearance. She was convinced that there was still more to the story, and she was determined to find out what had really happened in the forest. Sarah started her investigation by speaking to the older residents of the town, who still remembered the horrors that had once plagued their community. She scoured the library and the archives, looking for any information she could find about the disappearance. One day, she stumbled upon a hidden room in the library, filled with old journals and letters written by Mark Thompson and the reporter who had exposed the truth about what was happening in Ravenswood. Sarah was shocked to discover that there was still more to the story, and she was determined to uncover the truth. Sarah ventured into the forest, armed with the knowledge she had gained from the old journals. She encountered strange and eerie phenomena, like shadows that seemed to follow her and whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. She finally reached the abandoned cabin, and when she entered, she found herself transported back to the underground facility where Mark had been held captive all those years ago. The creatures were still there, and they were just as frightening as ever. Sarah fought her way through the tunnels and passageways, using the knowledge she had gained from the old journals to defeat the creatures. She finally emerged from the forest, shaken and scarred by her experience. Sarah returned to the library, and she continued her research, determined to uncover the truth about what was happening in Ravenswood. She discovered that the disappearance had not been the result of a sinister plot to create a new breed of super soldiers, as the task force had believed. Instead, the disappearance had been the result of a long-forgotten experiment gone wrong, an experiment that had created the creatures that haunted the forest. Sarah wrote a book about her findings, and her book quickly became a bestseller. The people of Ravenswood were shocked and horrified by what she had uncovered, and they were grateful for her efforts to finally expose the truth. Sarah became a legend in her own right, and her name was forever linked to the mystery of the disappearance in Ravenswood. But even though she had uncovered the truth, she knew that the creatures that haunted the forest would always be there, waiting for their next victim. And so, the mystery of the disappearance in Ravenswood remains a chilling tale of horror, a reminder of the evil that still lurks in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. The forests are still dense and the hills are still rolling, and the people of Ravenswood know that there is something dark and sinister lurking in the shadows, waiting to claim its next victim. For those who dare to venture into the forest, they do so at their own peril. For they know that the horrors of Ravenswood are still there, waiting for their next victim. And they know that the mystery of the disappearance will never be fully solved, a haunting reminder of the evil that still haunts the town. Years after Sarah's investigation, strange things started happening in the town again. People went missing, just like before, and strange whispers could be heard in the wind. Sarah's book had sparked a new interest in the mystery of the disappearance, and many people came to Ravenswood to see for themselves. One day, a group of tourists entered the forest, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious creatures that Sarah had written about. But they quickly realized that they had made a terrible mistake. The creatures were still there, and they were more powerful than ever. The tourists were never seen again, and the town was once again plagued by fear and terror. Sarah returned to Ravenswood, determined to put an end to the horrors once and for all. She had been studying the creatures for years, and she knew more about them than anyone else. She entered the forest, armed with her knowledge and a newfound determination. As Sarah delved deeper into the forest, she encountered more and more of the creatures. They were everywhere, lurking in the shadows and waiting to attack. She fought her way through the forest, using her knowledge of the creatures to defeat them. But then, she came face to face with the source of the evil that haunted the forest. It was a dark and powerful entity, an ancient being that had been released from its prison by the failed experiment. The entity had been feeding off of the fear and terror of the people of Ravenswood, and it was growing stronger with each passing day. Sarah knew that she had to stop the entity before it was too late. She engaged it in a fierce battle, using her knowledge and her strength to defeat it. The battle was long and brutal, but in the end, Sarah emerged victorious. The entity was destroyed, and the town was finally free from the terror that had haunted it for so long. But Sarah's victory came at a great cost. She had been gravely injured in the battle, and she knew that she was not going to survive. But she was content, knowing that she had put an end to the evil that had plagued the town for so long. Sarah died in the forest, but her legacy lived on. She was remembered as the hero of Ravenswood, the one who had put an end to the horrors that had once plagued the town. And even though the entity had been defeated, the townspeople still knew that there was always something dark and sinister lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. The forest remains dense and the hills are still rolling, and the people of Ravenswood know that there is something dark and sinister lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. And so, the mystery of the disappearance in Ravenswood remains a chilling tale of horror, a reminder of the evil that still haunts the town. For those who dare to venture into the forest, they do so at their own peril, for they know that the horrors of Ravenswood are still there, waiting for their next victim. Several years had passed since Sarah's death, and the town of Ravenswood had finally returned to a sense of normalcy. People no longer feared the forest, and the disappearance had come to a halt. But as it turned out, the entity that Sarah had defeated was not the only one of its kind. There were others, and they were growing stronger by the day. One night, a group of teenagers decided to venture into the forest for a night of camping and exploration. They were determined to find the source of the evil that had once plagued the town, and to see for themselves if the rumors were true. As they made their way deeper into the forest, strange things started happening. They had whispers in the wind, and the shadows seemed to be closing in around them. But they were determined to keep going, and they pressed on, undeterred by their fears. However, their determination soon turned to terror as they came face to face with the creatures that Sarah had written about. They were just as vicious and terrifying as she had described, and the teenagers found themselves fighting for their lives. One by one, they were taken by the creatures, until only one was left. Desperate and alone, he stumbled upon an old mansion in the center of the forest. It was the same mansion that Sarah had entered years before, and it was still in ruins. As he explored the mansion, he stumbled upon a hidden room. Inside, he found an old journal, filled with entries from Sarah's investigation. As he read through the pages, he realized that Sarah had not defeated the entity after all. It had only been temporarily defeated, and it had been waiting for the right moment to return. The teenager soon realized that he was not alone in the mansion. The entity was there with him, and it was stronger than ever. The teenager tried to run, but the entity was too powerful. He was taken, and the town of Ravenswood was once again plunged into fear and terror. Years went by, and the teenager was never seen again. The disappearance started happening once more, and the townspeople realized that the entity had returned. They searched the forest, hoping to find the source of the evil, but they never returned. It wasn't until much later that the truth was finally revealed. The entity was not the only one of its kind, but it was the leader of a vast network of evil creatures. And it had been using Ravenswood as its breeding ground, creating more and more creatures to serve it. The townspeople of Ravenswood never suspected a thing, and the entity was free to do as it pleased. It was a master of disguise, and it could take on any form it wanted. And so, it continued to feed off of the fear and terror of the people, until there was no one left to terrorize. The entity had finally succeeded in its mission, and the town of Ravenswood was nothing but a ghost town, filled with the remnants of what once was. The mystery of the disappearance was finally solved, but it was a solution that no one had wanted to hear. The entity was still out there, waiting for its next victim, and the people of Ravenswood still feared the forest. The legacy of Sarah and the horrors of Ravenswood would never be forgotten, and the town would always be remembered as a warning to others, a warning of the evil that still lurks in the shadows, waiting for its next victim.